I was thinking about what's happened in this place over its lifetime, and it must have been sung in. Hymns have been sung in here, voices have been, joined together and lifted. And where does that go? I'm quite interested in where that sits in the building. Does it go into the fabric of the building? Does it just go into the air? Does it go into the atmosphere of the place? So it seemed really sensible to think about the materials that are involved in that and bring them out. I've been making work for about 10, 12 years now. I also make installation and I make drawings. Installation is my thing that I love. I love responding to space, which is why I was interested in Fabrica.
We're really excited to be working with Susie MacMurray for our summer show. This is a new site-specific piece using thousands of sheet music that has been collated, mainly donated but also bought second-hand. For me, the interesting thing with Susie's work has been her incredibly strong track record of working within historical sites and working site-specifically, and working with a variety of materials relevant to that place and bringing out new stories and contexts. So it felt perfect for the summer show.
To make a piece of work like this takes a lot of help. So here at Fabrica we've been working with the volunteers to make the components that go into the piece, and it's a huge amount of work. We've had to take pieces of music, take the books apart, take the staples and the threads out of them, and then we're reconstituting them by turning them into cones and stapling them together, and then the cones get stitched into the end, and a long piece of thread then goes up onto a ring, and they all get joined and pulled up in great forms to the ceiling. You couldn't make something like this by yourself, just like you couldn't make a symphony by yourself or sing in a choir by yourself. You need everybody's generosity and sort of excitement about it to put it together. It really connects up with my history, this piece, because as well as being a sculptor, in a former life I was a classical musician. I played in orchestras. And so it's been a real chance to actually connect a bit more directly to my history than normal. I'm quite interested in the fact that there's no trace on the music of the playing. There's a trace of the hand. You can see where the music has been worn, where people have turned the pages, but you can't see the sound that was made from it. So that seems to be a nice parallel to the idea of the sound disappearing into the buildings. It's almost trying to make an impossible landscape in the volume of the space where the sound would have vibrated and resonated, which is why it's called resonance. It's a sort of echo to the past history of the building. And then there's all different kinds of music in there. There's hymns, just like the hymns that would have been sung here. There's popular music, there's classical music, there's Christmas music, there's all sorts. And I'm hoping that, in a way, people will raise their heads and look up at the piece, and they might spot things they recognise, or some sort of, some quite iconic images that end up on the sheet music that you can spot if you look. Bring your binoculars.
So alongside the exhibition, we have a number of activities exploring and bringing out some of the themes within Susie's work. We've collaborated with a number of Brighton-based music organisations. So we have Brighton Early Music Festival, who will be programming a number of events, as well as Vocal Explosion, that are a large choir, and a number of artists working with creating something out of nothing, so using paper to construct another world through practical workshops with Lizzie Thomas, bringing in a storyteller, Jamie Crawford, who was in residence last summer, and also David Miles will be exploring through his work and an artist talk the darker side and more psychological aspect of different narratives and stories.
I'm interested in ephemeral things. As being a classical musician, everything that you do disappears. And in this day and age of, you know, having to hold on to material things, it's quite an interesting area to think about. Well, I made a piece for Pallant House Gallery in 2006 called Shell. It was a response to the fact that the couple who built the house, it was a loveless marriage, but they both had a passion about building this glorious house. And they put all of that into the house. It was almost like a shell that contained it. So I covered the walls with mussel shells and stuffed them with red silk velvet, which was the most opulent and expensive and exotic material I could think of. So it was about passion and excess into this brittle shell that was a container. And another piece is a piece called Promenade, which I made for National Trust property in Derbyshire, Kedleston Hall. And that involved 104 miles of gold embroidery thread being wound between the pillars in the Great Hall, in a way a little bit similar to the way the pillars are laid out at Fabrica, but very grand Robert Adam, you know. And that was speaking about the history of the house as something that was built when the owner had been on the Grand Tour and gone on his journey and seen all the wonderful things in Europe and brought them back. So we wound all of this gold thread, which was a reference to, you know, wealth and power and beauty, but it was like a sort of haze. It was an ephemeral haze. And then the visitors walked through, found their way through almost like a sort of maze. And for me, it was like the history of the building unravelling, as people fell on hard times at the turn of the century. It was almost like all of that wealth unravelled and dissipated, and it became this haze. For me, a piece of art is a kind of catalyst for thought. It's not about answering the question that you're asking. You're almost putting something out there to say, you know, now what do you think about this? What does this bring up for you? And I know what things, you know, I know where it's all coming from for me, and I know all the connotations. But as you put work out there, once the viewer sees it, it sort of completes a kind of triangle, and it only becomes what it is once other people are looking at it and bringing their own thoughts to it and questions or disagreements or whatever. It's there as a puzzle. The thing that keeps me making art is a kind of sense of wonder as to how we can be here and be so solid and successful and visceral, but yet we're so fragile and we're just gone in a minute. And I think most of the work I make, be it sculpture, drawing or installation, that kind of incomprehension of how that can be is buzzing along at the bottom somewhere. So I have to keep making and remaking new ways of kind of approaching that.